Well, good morning. What a beautiful day and a lovely location, and I'm so honored to be here with Edmund Thornton. There's so many people who played such a critical role more than 30 years ago in laying the foundation for the designation and the signing of that very important bill in Chicago at the Hilton Hotel on August 24th, 1984 by President Reagan. It didn't just happen overnight. And it's dangerous when we start mentioning names because you always forget people, but there was no one who played more significant role as a civic and business leader and someone who embraced this idea and reached out to all sorts of partners and colleagues to make it happen than Edmund Thornton. So it's a delight to be up here with him. And we discussed this a little bit earlier before we began, and Edmund asked if I'd kind of start. I'll ramble on a little bit about some of my memories, especially contextual things that relate to pre-84, leading up to 84. With the legislation, then, a commission was established. Edmund was the founding chair. So, we'll kind of go back and forth a little bit here. You correct me when I'm wrong, okay, Ed? But the late 70s, 1980, this was a pretty troubled region, and some of you who have deep roots here remember that. Joliet, for instance, had unemployment rates of over 25%, the highest in the nation. And a lot of economic change was taking place, structural change. Major industries that had been here for over 100 years closed or cut back. All sorts of things were happening that had really pretty negative impacts on the quality of life of the Canal communities. That isn't to say that industry still wasn't an important force here. Absolutely. We're on a major industrial transportation corridor, but it was a time of dramatic transformation, evolution, change. We were called the Rust Belt. And I think that really since the 1930s, since the Great Depression, there had never been such challenges. And it led to kind of a malaise. I mean, a lot of people really didn't feel good about where they were. They were losing jobs, businesses were leaving the downtown, going to new regional shopping centers, all sorts of things happening, many of them negative. And so there was such a focus kind of on the liabilities, on the problems, on the challenges. And yet there were a handful of people who were saying, wait a minute, we have extraordinary assets. And we have something to build on, to rethink our future, to build on the strengths and our rich history, our strategic location, but to re-envision this area. And the canal is what held everything together. It was the engine that gave birth, obviously, to all of these towns, gave birth to Chicago at one end. And yet it was a history that wasn't well known. And again, there were a few pioneers in that arena. Leonard Locke in Ottawa, who was championing a national park along the I&M Canal. John Lamb in Lockport, who started Canal Days. And again, it's dangerous once we start listing, so, know that the list is long. But they were two of the really champions there who were saying about our history, how important. You also have to remember that 1976 was a very important moment in America's life, the bicentennial. And I think it led to many of us realizing that our history is not just the colonial history or the Revolutionary War and George Washington and, East Coast and whatever, but that history is everywhere. It's our story as the American people. And so many historical societies were formed in 78, or 76 rather. Lots of programs of communities celebrating their history. Lots of interesting things were going on. It was the zeitgeist kind of the time. And I think that all contributed, into an understanding of the local history that we have along our canal, which is important for each of us who lives here, but is really important for the Midwest and the nation as a whole as well. So there's kind of a rediscovery of that. There was also a real convergence of leadership, and I've touched on that a bit here, but with the business and civic community in particular, and that was critical because, talk about, quote, quote, a national park. I mean, we didn't know what a heritage corridor was. There wasn't a name for it, but we knew that this region's history merited national recognition and support. And the canal itself was a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest designation. But it was fragmented. My organization, Open Lands, played a very important role with many advocates up and down the Canal area in the 60s that led in 1974 to the creation of the I&M Canal State Park. But it stopped at Joliet because it was more or less a traditional linear park, with trail along the towpath and so forth. And so from Joliet north, the canal was fragmented. And yet much of the support for the preservation was also coming from communities like Lamont and Summit and Lockport and Joliet. And so they kept coming back to Open Land saying, but what about our piece of prairie? And what about this? And what about that? Not just the canal, but also their section of the canal. So a vision started emerging of a bigger regional landscape that was grounded and defined by this historic waterway, but that a history that went before and after. And it was, this was a major trade and commerce route from early Native American culture, all the way through to the Industrial Revolution and beyond. And so there were multiple waterways, natural and man-made, railroads, roads, trails, that all reinforce the importance of this as a connecting link between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi, a gateway to the West, something that was acknowledged, by our founding fathers, really. So there were people like Edmund who rose up, who cared deeply about history and preservation, but was also one of the more important employers in the corridor. Edmund chaired with the National Park Service their centennial commission, which was not the centennial of the Park Service, as we know, which we'll be celebrating next year, but of the first park, Yellowstone. So he was a national leader who played a very important state role, but was grounded in his community that he loved deeply and had deep roots in. There were people like Gay Donnelly, whose roots were in Lockport originally, but a very prominent civic and business leader in Chicago, who was a great conservationist. Brooks McCormick, similar kind of profile. Tom Flavin from Inland Steel, Arnie Sobel from Material Service Corporation, John Trutter from Illinois Bell, Phil Hummer. I mentioned Phil was someone from LaSalle, but involved in finance in Chicago. These were the founders of what became Canal Corridor Association, the Upper Illinois Valley Association. It was critical to have that strong leadership from business and industry because people are saying, wait a minute, we've got unemployment rates like we've never seen since the Depression, and some factories have actually closed down, and you're talking about creating a national park? What's wrong with you? We said, no, this is a new kind of concept, something that's never been done before. So all those people who came together really crafted a unique vision that now, of course, is a model for 49 heritage areas. We're going to hear about 2 others in the metropolitan area that are being proposed right now, and it really triggered a national movement. But at that time, it was an unknown, and people were very nervous. But it was very much a grass tops, but also a grassroots effort, too. And there were just concerned citizens up and down this corridor representing their chambers of commerce, their local historical societies, individuals who were passionate about their community. And they coalesced under the umbrella of Friends of the I&M Canal, which was a 501c3 also. But that was very much a grassroots effort. We had meetings just like this, up and down the corridor all the time. Connie Fetzer, and I'm very pleased to hear that Connie's still with us. I lost track, but living in Ottawa, was the chair of that, and just so many key people got involved. Leadership was key here, though. We had political leadership, too. We had a strong governor who cared about these things, Governor Thompson. But most importantly, we also had members of Congress who recognized value. Tom Corcoran from Ottawa, a member of the House, championed these efforts early on. The head of our delegation, Chuck Percy, our senator, senior senator, embraced it. He got the entire Illinois delegation to endorse this. It was the first time, at least in memory, maybe the first time ever, that the entire Illinois delegation supported something, because the corridor bridged what was classically considered upstate and downstate. I-80 was kind of that. And so the idea that you could have communities in Grundy and LaSalle County, which were, even though not far from Chicago, seen as very different from the metropolitan region, all coming together, saying this is our shared heritage, our history, and we care and we want this. And so that was very, very powerful. Media played a very important role also. In particular, John Hussar from the Tribune. He did a series called Chicago's Hidden Wilderness. And it appeared 5 days in the Tribune, front page each day with maps, and listed again all these assets. People never thought of them in a geographic sense. All the important natural areas, the parks, the archaeological sites, the architecture, the industrial heritage of this region. This was one of the birthplaces of the Industrial Revolution. So all those things kind of came together, and the challenge was, how do you get that word out to the public? So one important role was that of the media, and played a really significant one. But it was also scholars coming together, geographers, historians, archaeologists, preservationists, and doing workshops and town meetings up and down the corridor, reaching out to schools, and just reconnecting people to their history, to their heritage that had been kind of forgotten and overlooked. And again, so much of the feeling was kind of negative, of kind of, I got to get out of here. There are no jobs, and but wait a minute, you've got assets that are extraordinary, and you have a rich history, and it's reflected in the built environment and these natural areas, and there are great recreational opportunities, and you've got millions of people living at the edge of this. So what emerged was this linkage of economy, revitalizing these canal towns and their waterfronts, improving the quality of life, that made it more competitive as a region. Many of the industries were saying, we're having a hard time attracting high-level personnel, because we're competing with the West and whatever. So economy, ecology, this extraordinary set of pre-settlement natural areas, prairie remnants, wetlands, on a flyway, etc. And culture, the people, the stories, from Native American times, thousands of years ago, up to the present. And the historic preservation movement was at a crossroads too. It initially focused on the buildings of the rich and famous and our presidents and isolated sites. It was expanding. They were talking about historic districts, that a whole downtown or a community might have collectively significance and could be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which is honorific. It doesn't bring protection. It's up to the local governments to do that, but it's the national listing of what's important. And so when I got involved with the I&M under the umbrella initially of open lands, the models I was familiar with was certainly Lowell, Massachusetts, where the entire city of Lowell was designated a National Historical Park. It was a new category. I was very familiar with what was going on in Europe. I had lived in France for a few years in what they call parcs régionaux, these regional parks, big landscape scale areas that share common history, common activity, function, but where the land is largely private, public-private, but collectively, tells a story. In England, the national parks, very unlike our national parks, they're whole districts, like the Lake District, for instance. Again, most of the land is private. Now in Europe, government has a much stronger control. So all these things kind of came together, and out of all the people engaged in these discussions, we in Illinois crafted a new model. The I&M Canal National Heritage Corridor. We didn't know what to call it. Very key person in helping us think about the boundaries and so forth was Michael Konzen, geographer at the University of Chicago, played a very important role. Mark Bowman's doing that now for the Calumet Heritage, proposed heritage area, which you'll hear about later. And so anyway, the key here was partnerships, that it wasn't one big decision, that yes, there are boundaries, but it's not a traditional park where everything within the boundary is owned by one government agency and everything outside isn't. No, a mosaic of public and private lands. It didn't change existing zoning or land use or environmental standards. It didn't lower them either. So industry could get on board, communities could get on board, and the public. And so it was a really amazing thing. And that culminated then, obviously, with the actual legislation and President Reagan coming here. But that was the beginning, not the end. And so I think I've spoken long enough here. I want to ask Edmund if he could share some thoughts, and especially because Edmund not only played a critical role as a founding member of Upper Illinois Valley that became Canal Corridor, and a real leadership role in preserving heritage in his own county, but he was also the founding chairman of the federal commission that was established. So Edmund, what did I get wrong, and what would you like to add here?
Thank you, Jerry. And good morning to all of you. Some of you are veterans, having been to this kind of a conference the original conference, I guess, 3 years ago, and there was quite a few, I understand, new members or new attendees here today. I grew up in Ottawa, Illinois, right along the canal. As a matter of fact, in the house that I live in was built in 1857 by an Englishman who was apparently a rather significant or wealthy individual, and the research has suggested that he heard about the canal. He knew about canals in England, and he was a venture capitalist, I guess you might say, of his time. And he bought property along the canal because of it. He understood the economic significance of the activity on the canal. This is now, we're talking 1857. The canal was completed in 1848. And there was quite a bit of public awareness of the importance of the canal. The railroad was built again around 1850, almost 52. And again, this property fronted both on the canal and the railroad, which paralleled the canal. These, again, as Jerry has pointed out, were corridors of communication and transportation of those early days. And so I had a long and a personal connection to the canal and its importance in the history of Illinois. My father and I, we lived in the country, I should say, to identify this spot I'm talking about. We had horses, riding horses, and we used to ride on the canal. Those were the days when nobody objected to having equine uses of a public thoroughfare. I'm a geographer by training and by professional activity, involved in the mining business in Ottawa, Illinois, mining of silica, SiO2, silicon dioxide, sand, maybe you might call it, but it's a very special type of sand, which essentially was used primarily in the manufacture of glass products. There's a large glass plant in Ottawa today, and it was started back in the mid-1800s, and it went through various different names. It's in the village of Naplate, and you may wonder what in the world that means. Well, it was National Plate Glass, and the people there that lived there were pretty much factory workers. It was almost a factory town with probably has more taverns per population of any village in northern Illinois.
And a speed trap too, right?
It can be a speed trap. So it's an interesting part of the economy of Illinois. But as Jerry suggested, I was very much involved in local history with the LaSalle County Historical Society, and helped establish their little museum in Utica, Illinois, which is again right on the canal, and we preserved an old stone warehouse that was built in about 1848, and we converted it from a ruin into what is now a very handsome little local museum. I was involved with the Illinois State Natural History, the Nature Preserve Commission, and helped establish what is now the Illinois
Historic Sites Advisory Council, right?
Historic Sites Advisory Council.
You were the first chair, weren't you, Edmund?
I was indeed.
Yeah.
But and that was not very well appreciated, particularly by the director of the State Department of Conservation. It was called because he was more interested in coon dogs and fishing and hunting. And when I told him that the state of Illinois had been designated the director of the director of the Department of Conservation was also the historic preservation officer of the state. A dear friend of mine from Peoria was the designated chairman of that commission,
Bill Rutherford.
Bill Rutherford,
Right.
yes. And I told him, I said, Bill, you're the National Historic Preservation Officer. And he said, well, what's that? So I had been a director, or a representative, I guess you'd call it, for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Right. Every state has two
Board of Advisors. Right.
And one of my trips to Washington was to look up the National Trust office and find out who that person was. And that's when they told me about the director of the Department of Conservation. Well, Bill Rutherford was a wonderful guy, and we talked about this, and he said, what am I supposed to do about it? I said, well, he said, I said, you have to have a commissioner, a body, organizing body. He said, well, put something together for me. So I put together 5 architects, 5 archaeologists, and 5 historians as an advisory group. But nonetheless, as Jerry has suggested, Illinois was in some economic distress during that period. We're talking now in the mid-1970s. And nonetheless, there was a great body of citizens who were interested in the history of the state and also in the preservation of its natural assets and its man-made or cultural assets. And as Jerry had suggested, the Upper Illinois Valley Association was established, and we were looking at what was being done from Chicago down through the upper part of the state, as we called it. We had not really defined it as it later was to be done, but from that effort, it became apparent that the canal was a connecting thoroughfare, or let's call it a corridor. And that sort of was an unusual new word, a corridor. Well, yes, we know what it means, but I mean, what's that going to do with everything that we have here in what is now the Canal Corridor Association, or the Illinois-Michigan Canal? These things took time to sort of be defined, both in the minds of those of us who wanted to do something about preservation and how to interpret these assets that we had here. And the state was a reluctant partner. They were not particularly interested in putting up any money for a new organization or an effort to be involved in historic preservation of this so-called corridor. But we did put together a group that went to Washington. We lobbied to Congress. We actually, Jerry, I think, was with me, and Connie Fetzer and several others, where we actually testified before the House of Representatives about the importance of preserving this feature of man-made feature in northern Illinois. And as Jerry said, the entire Illinois delegation got behind this effort and eventually moved the legislation through the House. And Chuck Percy, Senator Percy at the time, certainly gave a great deal of leadership in the United States Senate. The result of all that was then the Illinois, well, it was the I&M Canal National Heritage Corridor. And that was a long moniker, a lot of names in there, and again the word corridor. Well, the National Park Service didn't know much about what this new entity was all about. They had no particular jurisdiction in this area. It was a state property. The canal is owned by the state of Illinois. But we were able to get the national designation, I should say, as a national corridor. And this is, I think, was really the key and the critical part of it, the whole effort, was to make this a national corridor, not an Illinois department or a corridor of just Illinois alone. I wanted to keep it out of the politics of Illinois General Assembly or Chicago or any other community up and down the corridor. So the commission was established with a federal designation to give it the imprimatur of objectivity, of, in fact, a national significance, and to avoid the complexity of regional politics. That was a new concept. The state didn't understand this. The general, let's call it the Congress itself, was a bit mystified by really what they had created. The National Park Service was totally nonplussed about this because it was given national designation, and we were getting federal money to operate this. We had $250,000 for a year to start with, and that was what we thought was a very significant amount of money, and we were very pleased to have it. The commission itself was designated to include representatives from the greater Chicago area down through the various towns and communities all the way down to LaSalle, Peru. And I was the first chair. We sort of stumbled along there for a while, deciding just exactly what our responsibility was, how we were going to use this money. When the local politicians and the local communities found out we had $250,000, everybody came forward and said, oh, yeah, we've got a couple of good big projects in our town or our community. Yeah, help us out. Well, we had to tread lightly, and we had to tread very carefully to maintain public support, at the same time not to discourage public involvement. And I will say, the early days of that commission was sort of a dicey time. The press, as Jerry has pointed out, the media was intrigued by this whole concept and gave us pretty good coverage, certainly in the Chicago press and some of the local newspapers. But the interesting thing was that with the federal designation, it brought the stature and the legitimacy of this whole effort way above local criticism, local politics, and even including state politics, and gave it the imprimatur of a national prominence. The original concept was that the members on that commission were to be nominated by the governor of the state of Illinois. Nominated, not appointed. Those names were then submitted to the department, the director of the National Park Service, or actually the Secretary of Interior. So there again, it kept it out of the hands of local politics. Those names were referred to then the director of the Secretary of the Interior, who in turn again didn't know much about what was going on out here, but he had the responsibility of approving those or making those appointments. And I will say, Jerry and I and some of the early members of the Upper Illinois Valley Association kind of nudged those those nominations, and we helped the governor sort of make up his mind about some of the names, who they were, where they came from. And he welcomed, at least those days with the Ogilvy and Thompson, they welcomed our suggestions, and they were kind of, I remember later on a bit, they were a little annoyed the fact that they weren't really making the appointments because they had their own idea of who they wanted. Well, no, I'm sorry, Governor, but yours are only nominations. And that's why we wanted the federal designation, National, the I&M Canal National Heritage Corridor, National Heritage Corridor. Well, gentlemen and ladies, this is sort of a ramble of the early days of what was going on and why this entity was created and how it progressed through puberty and into middle age. And it's up to you to carry it on to its full potential. But the concept was of such national importance that it was adopted now, as Jerry has said, in 49 other entities or states in the Union, and the National Park Service has come to live with it. They didn't particularly like the idea of having to give money or having to give federal money for this outcast or this young upstart out there in Illinois, but every other state began to pick it up. And in fact, the House of Representatives, where these bills are begun, budget bills, money bills, all these other states had very aggressive local congressional delegations that said, well, we want one of those in our state, too. And as it ended up, pretty much, toward the end, those commissions in other states were getting over $1 million a year. We started out with $250,000, and we thought, wow, that's really great. But some of the other states, Rhode Island, a little tiny, one of the smallest states, they have the canal, and they've got a corridor, and they were getting $1 million a year. So the National Park Service then said, well, we don't think we don't know where it's going to go, and so they suggested perhaps it should be terminated because it was legitimized for a 10-year period only. Then it had to be reauthorized. That is the Federal Commission, and we did go for, I think, two ups, at least two. Was it three? Well, maybe it was two. So anyway, it went on for 20 years, and then finally the National Park Service suggested maybe that it ought not to be continued, and it should be more of a private entity. And out of that then came, of course, the Illinois Canal Corridor Association. It's a semi-public private organization whereby the federal government will match, I guess it was at $300,000 now they're getting.
That's this year.
This year. And then the state of Illinois has to come up, or the corridor, or the area has to come up with the matching $300,000. And it's not a bad idea, really. But progress is in the wind, and I think your attendance and your patience with this bit of a history is testimony to the degree of affection and the degree of commitment that you have for maintaining public awareness of the I&M Canal National, the Heritage Corridor Commission now. But Illinois was the founding state. It was the genesis. It was here with people who are now long gone, not with us any longer. And Jerry gave you some of the names of prominent leaders at the time. And it's out of the hands, really, of the state, except for the fact that they do own the canal, and they're responsible for maintaining the canal. But they have even come along now, reluctantly in some cases, but they are now a partner in the whole venture. So here we are, a semi-public, semi-private, and organization that is preserving part of the history of our state. Thank you.
Ask for some questions.
Thank you, Edmund. I think you can see that we're very blessed in Illinois to have someone like Edmund who's provided leadership in so many arenas, but especially given today's gathering for the creation of the Heritage Corridor. And we'd like to encourage questions and a dialogue. I'd just like to make a couple other quick comments here, though. But the strength of the INM is that it wasn't one big decision, that it's partners, public, private, coming together within certain boundaries, a shared vision. It's leveraged huge investment beyond the government's investment. Private citizens, corporations, foundations, historical societies, forest preserve districts, park districts, so many others contributing. But the challenge is that we always have to engage the next generation of leadership, youth, but also elected officials, corporate leaders, civic leaders. It's an ongoing educational challenge. And so it's a lot of work, because it never ends. And that's what today's all about, I think. While we're reflecting on the past and what the conditions were and who the leaders, what kind of leadership there was and how this came together as an unorthodox thing that now has become a national model. But what does that tell us about the next 30 years, about tomorrow and beyond? And so it's a very community-intensive designation, unlike a traditional national park. And the burden is not on the Park Service, it's on all of us, public and private. That's exciting, but it's also challenging. And of course, when Otto was successful this last round in getting the redesignation, it also identified or clarified some of the boundary issues that had been unresolved when the legislation first passed in '84. So now the Chicago end is officially part of it, along the Chicago River and the Sanitary and Ship Canal, also along the Cal-Sag Channel. Medewan is now part of the INM, this regional partnership, umbrella designation, and a few other sites as well. So how are we using this expanded definition and this, kind of reauthorization to achieve even greater goals? But anyway, we'd love to hear from you. So any questions, comments? Yeah.
I just have two that came from our table.
Sure.
And we are on a schedule, so
Right.
if there are questions, let's bring them forward so we can find out everything we need to find out. But there were two from our table. One was, what goals did you have 30 years ago which have never happened?
Well, I think one of them was figuring out the eastern ends of the corridor, that they were always seen conceptually. This was from Lake Michigan to the Illinois River, the Illinois-Michigan Canal, and so how do you incorporate a big city and its neighborhoods and the Cal-Sag and so forth? So I think that it's now positioned to do that, but we haven't. Well, we had support in communities like Bridgeport and some of the other canal communities in Chicago. The city didn't embrace it, and I would argue that they still haven't. And that's a great opportunity for tourism, for all sorts of, marketing and branding and so forth. So that's one thing that I'd say hasn't yet been fully realized. I think also maybe the condition of the canal, while it's improved dramatically, the state park, there's still huge issues there in terms of maintenance and so forth. Ed, do you have any about goals that weren't realized yet?
Well, as a geographer, and you mentioned his name, of course, but Michael Conzen at the University of Chicago was very instrumental in helping define what the boundaries shall be, or the geographic identification of this corridor, how wide it should be. It can't be just 90 feet along the right-of-way of the canal. That's the federal, that's the That was the state and federal designation as being public land, but it had to include everything from the park now up at Navy Pier all the way down to LaSalle, Peru. And so trying to define exactly what the corridor, what it means by a corridor, what are the definitions of that? Well, that was a tough call. And as Jerry has suggested, over time that has been pretty well resolved. It's including now very large pieces of property or land that make up the new definition of the corridor. We, at the time, had no idea exactly what we wanted to do or could do legally.
You have another question?
I have one right here.
There you
It says, do you think that if Paul Douglas had been reelected rather than Chuck Percy, would the canal corridor have been authorized?
Well, I think that's hard to say. I mean, this didn't happen early in Senator Percy's tenure. It was towards the end, in fact. And a very curious thing happened. Tom Corcoran was the champion in the House. He challenged Senator Percy in the primary. Paul Simon was also on the Democratic side a great champion of the legislation and the effort. He challenged Senator Percy and, of course, won. Senator Percy almost lost the previous election, and he was criticized by many in Illinois for traveling around the world, head of foreign affairs, and so on and so forth, and not bringing home enough to Illinois. He hired a young staff person, Jim Keene, and his sole charge was to come up with high-profile projects in Illinois. So we were very lucky that we had a project, and he was looking for something, and it included the metro area of Chicago and, quote, unquote, downstate, you know, if we want to think of us as, but politically downstate, south of I-80. So Senator Percy embraced it, and again, we had people like Gay Donnelly and Brooks McCormick and Edmund and others who were strong supporters of the senator. That certainly helped. But, so I don't know. I think, again, you have to look at this at the end of Senator Percy's career, not at the beginning.
Another question, why hasn't Chicago been more supportive of the canal corridor?
If I can briefly comment on that. Essentially, Chicago is a huge, metropolitan area, both geographically and obviously population-wise and politically. And the canal has been just sort of morphed away. It had no real identification in the greater downtown or the greater part of Cook County and Chicago. As you come down where we are today, yeah, we all know where the canal is. We know where the towpath is. There's no vestige of that in the greater part of Chicago itself. The population lives there today has little or no connection with the canal that maybe their forefathers did. So it's tough to do that, and politically, Chicago has other priorities.
No, I agree with Edmund's comments here, and I think, our challenge, and we've tried to do it. I see John Pounds has arrived. He's going to be telling you about an art project that many of you participated in at Navy Pier, and a great deal of work at the so-called Canal Origin site, where the canal began, right at Bubbly Creek there. Was the first designated archaeological landmark by the city of Chicago. There are a number of positive things and pockets of support and awareness, but it didn't expand enough, and it's very challenging, as Edmund says, in a big city to create that kind of awareness. But I think it is one of our biggest challenges that we should not abandon.
Correct.
Pick this up.
Sure.
Just to keep us on time.
I'm always the cautious timekeeper here. We could go with this one all day long because there have been other interesting questions that we can bring up a little later, and I think we will. The first thing I want to say is thank you so much, because this was an important story to hear. I'm sure everybody got something out of that in relation to where you are with your connections to the canal corridor. And from, if this had been the general public, they would be saying things like, that ditch has a history. Our idea of identity is so crucial here. because it starts very personally, how you first saw the place, and then what you learn about it, and then where the connections are. And the broadest identity we can have, all of us together, there was a comment, I'll just quickly read it, from Charles. The I&M Canal would benefit from being part of a larger context, which includes, for instance, the French Heritage Corridor and a lot more environment and historical association under an umbrella committee. This is pretty close to what the Alliance is trying to do, to recognize the history, the archaeology, the geography, the industry, all of it, this idea of what a corridor is. And Edward, you are so eloquent. I love your choice of words. At one point he used affection in a discussion about politics. I mean, that was awesome. But it is our job, as he stated, to interpret these assets. It is our job to light fires, but to keep us aware that we're all part of this big identity. And the Commission did a great job in lighting fires, and the Alliance is going to continue to grow the identity and make sure that Chicago's role in that is significant and not neglected, whether they like it or not. We have a break coming in 10 minutes. I don't know if I can do this quickly enough, but our goal was, at this point, was to go around and let each person introduce your name, your town, your organization, and if you have a particular passion, whether it's history, geography, economics, I don't know. Do you think we can get it in there? All right. We'll start on this side. Who are you? Town, organization, and passion.
Gail Crompton. I live in Crest Hill, but I volunteer at the Medewin Tallgrass Prairie, National Tallgrass Prairie, and as part of the Medewin Heritage Association, and that's my passion.
Nicole Lyra, I work at the Channahon Park District. I was kind of elected to come because I just really have a passion about being outdoors, getting people outside and active.
Roger Thompson, Joliet, Will County Project Pride. My passion is to bring attention to the very valuable historic aspects of the canal and other aspects that will boost the economy in the area.
Bill McCandless from Joliet. I was one of the members of Friends of the I&M Canal back in the 80s and 90s, and one of the members of the Canal, particularly interesting historical the group that interpreted history up and down the corridor. We don't have an organization like that right now. I would be interested in seeing that reconstructed, and also, since I'm from Joliet, my interest in a national heritage park, similar to those in Easton and Lowell, a number of places in the East Coast, which could benefit not only the Joliet area, but the entire image of the corridor. That I'd like to see that go forward.
Randy Malcolm and my other half Jackie from our sales. We've both been involved with the Canal Corridor Association for a number of years and been working with the Canal Board.
Ruth Nelson from Dyersville. My background is art history, and I wrote the book Searching for Marquette, which tells the story of Marquette through artwork and monuments along the Marquette Trail.
John Wilkinson from Vermont, and I'm from historic St. James at Sag Ridge Church. And our parish this year is celebrating 181 years. And our parish is tied to the canal, and the canal is our history.
Yeah, that's true.
This is the pastor, and
The Irish immigrants that dug the canal
he
that
loves the
built
history.
our
He's
church
fantastic.
back in early 1800s. I'm going to speak a little bit more, so you'll hear me then. Did I say my name?
Good morning, I'm Wade Spang. I'm a supervisor at the Daily National Tallgrass Prairie. That's where we're here. Of course, my passion involves natural resources.
Hi, I'm Daniel Jacobson, Heritage Reporter from the Visitor Trail.
Coming on, I know it is. Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah.
Recognize the whole area and bring visitors to the area and help businesses.
Hi, Greg Poole, Director of the Philadelphia Historical Museum. I would say my passion at the moment, they vary, but is getting something done in relation with the former Illinois State Prison site in relation to the canal. You did that.
Jack Penning, I'm with Scenic Illinois, and my passion is that Eastern End. I think that is the key to unlocking this whole development up and down the corridor.
Frank Gaylor, consultant from Bourbonnais, Illinois, economic development, history, and just the Iron Canal itself.
Hi, I'm Bill Jankowski from Omni Arts from Starbuck Country, and our passion is to unify all the arts and try to encourage those artists and people that are looking to have performances and the artists and musicians and dancers come to the area to really develop the economic impact in the Starbuck Country.
Hello, I'm Charles Parisi. I'm a historian, specializing in French presence in North America, and my book is here, a little commercial, of course. My passion personally is to try to unify all those wonderful people who all work phenomenally well in their niche, and to try to put them together. For instance, nobody has mentioned the reenactors. Now, the reenactors, the movement is dying down, but it's a phenomenal work. I think the word IMF Canal reenactors as well. And all the people try to save what's left of history, of nation, of whatever made this country the beautiful countries today, the people before. And all of us should really try to unify. That's why I'm hoping that what we do here, and today I'm officially representing the Globe, what they call Historical Society, but I created the French Heritage Museum at Starbuck in Kankakee 2 years ago. All those activities can be federated, and as a whole, we will have more political power, because that's what we need, mainly in those days where everybody wants to cut budgets, okay, including in history, in art, and so on. So, thank you.
I'm Stephanie Sewell. I'm the director of the Illinois Labor History Society, and our goal is to tell the stories of working people in our state, and obviously the canal is an incredibly important part of that.
I'm Diane Sanders. I'm with the Reddick Mansion in Ottawa, Illinois. My passion is the early history of Ottawa, Illinois, William Reddick, which always includes the Illinois-Michigan Canal.
My name is Linda Roberts. I'm from Ottawa, and I'm involved with the last remaining toll collectors building on the canal. A little help with the Reddick Mansion, and my passion is involved with children.
Which is great.
Arnie Baxter, I'm the president of the Ottawa Canal Association. My passion is history, and you'll hear me talk about that in a little bit, but also a passion to get water in the canal from Joliet to Sal.
The mayor of Ottawa must have
On
great
Global,
water.
you met me
I
before.
heard that portion of the
Should be
canal.
one goes through the town. Yeah, really would.
Yeah, it's possible. It just takes a little money,
Well, he's a good guy. He's been a strong mayor. Yeah.
liaison.
John Pounds, as much as anybody directs artists, I'm director of Chicago Public Art.
What do you say?
He's the head of the Chicago Public Art.
Sue Bennett,
And they did
National Park
the
Service.
Navy Pier, you know, the benches.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to give a presentation later.
Personality and part-time Indian Dunes National Leadership, so traveling back and forth. My passion, I grew upstream from here, born and raised along the DuPage River, and passion is sharing everybody's heritage and gathering stories and finding ways to work together.
I missed
Hi, my name is Jerry Reynolds. I'm an alderman in LaSalle, and my passion is to get that canal open all the way from LaSalle this direction in my lifetime.
I'm Denise Edgei Savada. I've been in George the Mansion for 14 years. I came from England in 1947 and sold gardens in the canal. In a few years' time, I saw a junkyard there. I am so thrilled what we have done so far. I'd love to see it open all the way, at least Martell's. Thank you.
My name is Susan White. I'm from the Montero Historical Society, and my passion is people, history, and choice.
Good morning, my name is Rick Short. I'm with the Adelmann National Holocaust Parade, and my passion is getting people out to experience the outdoors.
Good morning, I'm Paul Ladovitz. I'm the superintendent for the National Park Service at Indiana Dunes National Lake Shore, and I'm the acting superintendent at Pullman National Monument. Couple passions. One, I'd like to see the Indiana Dunes Lake Shore programmatically and physically connected to the Untitled Chapter, the Italian
He's like the best
Chicago.
person they could
The
have
bigger
selected.
passion is I just take out our role in teaching people how to play outside.
Good morning, I'm Dave Township of City Morris. I guess passion would be history and then improving qualities of life, which this is a major impact to better the outdoors.
I'm Pete Rodet. There's 7 generations of my family in Northeast Illinois, farmers, as am I. I've always enjoyed history since I was very young. Still do. My passion is my wife.
That's a tough one to follow. I'm Joe Wheeler, the archaeologist and heritage program manager in the Adelmann National Holocaust Parade, and my passion is better understanding, managing, and sharing the 10,000 years at least that people have been on the land here.
Lauren Schaub. I live in Orland Hills, however, I volunteer at the Adelmann National Tallgrass Parade. My special interest is in the heritage activities there, and I'm on the board of the Adelmann Heritage Association, and we have a display over here if you'd like to learn a little bit more about us.
I'm Brian Conroy from Joliet, and I'm with the Will County Historical Society. I also work at the Joliet Area Historic Museum, and I'm also in what you're talking about. I'm a reenactor as well. I do the Civil War, but last year I got into doing French rendezvous. So a lot of different things.
I'm Sandy Vasco. Grew up in Vermont. My family had a business on Canal Street, and that's when I figured out what the canal was. I live in Lockport. I now live in Wilmington. I'm chair of the Will County Historic Preservation Commission and executive president of the Will County Historic Museum and Research Center in downtown Lockport.
Hi, I'm Chief Pinozo, and I'm in my first year with the Will County Historic Preservation Commission, and my passion is to learn all I can about the area and its history.
Good morning, my name is Derek Burnett. I'm actually from Boeing, but here because I love the canal, I'm passionate to my wife and kids. I want to preserve this magnificent corridor for their use, and my major passion under that is like canoeing and kayaking on the canal. And my 30-year dream is to ride a luxury packet boat from the Chicago River down the Florida.
My name is Alice Crankvitz. I'm from Burr Ridge. I'm currently the Civic Center Authority chairperson.
our offices or our visitor centers in Bedford Park, and we own the Santa Fe Prairie, and we host the annual Des Plaines Valley Rendezvous every September. My passion is outdoor education. As a former educator, I want to get kids involved.
Some of you may recognize me, others will get to know me very soon. My name is Helen Milam, and I am a reenactor and public speaker. My passion is women in history, dating back to the Adelmann Canal forward to the 1920s. I believe that children are the key to success, and if we can't reach them, we can't go forward.
Hi, I'm a first timer. My name is James Miller. I'm Director of Communications for the Canal Corridor Association. And my passion is to build interest and drive awareness around the canal through providing great experiences. We have the canal built up in the south.
My name is Jean Wilcox. I grew up in Willow Springs, so along the canal. I am the Historic Preservation Manager for Will County Land Use Department. I'm also a committee member of the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council.
Debbie Jo Erickson, Administrative Operations Manager for the Will County Land Use Department. Avid tourist advocate, like through economic development, founder of Kicks on 66 Sale, which runs with the Illinois Red Carpet Corridor. There's brochures over here to peek at what we've got going on with some festivals.
I'm Bill Kelly, I'm the Director of the Illinois 66 Scenic Byway, and my passion is helping the communities turn a visitor experience into an economic experience.
Jill Jackson, I'm Michigan County Trail Department Natural Resources based out of Morris. My biggest passion is probably just helping local kids realize what they have actually in their own backyard.
I'm Matt Ashton. I'm the archaeologist of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. I've been there for the last 25 years, and over that time I've helped manage and study the Iron Canal.
Dawn Cobb, also an archaeologist with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and my passion is historic cemeteries.
From Woodstock, Illinois, map traffic and cartography. I've done a lot of national illustrations for the Canal Corridor Association over the years, including those on nice display over there.
I tell you, it's frightening what's going on.
My passion
He's
is
going to put it under
illustrating history of the canal and creating the illustrated book I've been working on this year to show a journey of the canal boat from LaSalle through Chicago.
I was on one of the transition teams, and I heard some of this stuff.
I'm going to say C because I don't know why you certainly stand up.
The budget has the state museum's budget should be the closed on everything in Springfield if it went through.
I'm a geographer, and my interests really revolve around community revitalization, both the
I don't think it's too well known yet, but that's what's on the table.
I'm Madeline Tudor. I'm an anthropologist at the Field Museum, and my passion is understanding and building connections between people and place.
I'm Mark Bowman. I'm a geographer working at the Field Museum. I'm passionate about this area and also about the climate region and figuring out how these areas can connect to each other.
Allison Paul, also from the Field Museum, and I'm going to build on Madeline's. My passion is connecting kids to place.
Oh, they've been great.
Susan with the Village of Convergence, and I serve on the Environment Committee, and we focus on preserving the environment as well as our history. Our community is, our village itself is young, but it was settled in the 1830s, and so my passion is to record the history for our villages so that we have something to for people to look at what happened in our area before we began.
I'm Jan Lindstrom, a second-year volunteer at Eastern Prairie State Park in wonderful Morris, and I'm a social studies and language arts teacher, just retired. So I have a great passion for saving the land and saving the history of our country, and especially this area. So.
Hi, I'm Mary Paulson, I'm Marketing Director for the
Canal Heritage Alliance Committee. I am a board member of Canal Heritage Partnership, and I am a coordinator for the development of the east end of the CalSag Trail, which we are breaking ground this year. Yay, after 10 years. So I am passionate about getting people to realize all the assets and how wonderful this area is along the Calumet region, and we have so much to offer, and I love when people discover that.
Pam Silsky, I'm a landscape architect with the Forest Preserve of Cook County, and one of my passions is building regional bicycle trails, one of them being the CalSag, along with Mary. The Forest Preserve has several segments. The first is the 7-mile segment on the west end that'll start from the Adelmann Canal, and it'll go to 86 Avenue in Hales Park this year. And then we have 13 miles that will be built this year, so of 26.
I'm Dick Wayne, happily retired executive director of the Metropolitan Water Conservation District, and among my passions is the canals in the Chicago area.
I'm Missy Norman Schumacher. I'm currently a trustee with the Village of Channahon and running the post for mayor. Literally grew up on the banks of this canal on Blackberry Lane. We all know past my family. So welcome to Channahon. It's our village administrator, Tom Durkin, our development director, Mike Petrick, and our marketing coordinator, Nicole Norris. And our goal is to protect and incorporate our natural resources and recreation into our development plan.
That's good.
Well, Jerry and Edmund, there's your team.
Hey, it's a strong team. Here, here.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, check your watch, see who you want to connect with, you know where the bathrooms are, and we're going to set up the next presentation. Be back in 10 minutes.
Good job.
Well,
It was great.
Well, you got the right.
Well, we're a good team.
Truly, that was totally awesome. I hope we have that on tape. That was magnificent.
Introduction's overdue, but so many people. How'd that work?